Yes, we've spent 5 painful years trying to engage our belief that we need to have agriculture and a work program on agriculture, and we are not winning. We heard from the panelists this morning that the news coming out of the negotiations are not the best of what we had hoped for. But we also heard that maybe we need to do more, both at country level and in other platforms. And I'm happy today to have 2 distinguished gentlemen who are going to take us outside the UNFCCC process to share with us some processes where maybe we could be putting energy as well and efforts to making sure we are ahead. It is my honor and privilege to introduce you to Franklin Moore, who is going to be talking to us today this time. He's a career member of the Senior Executive Service and was appointed as Senior Development Counselor to the United States Mission to the United Nations agencies in Rome in August of 2010. He's the Vice Chair of the UN Committee on World Food Security, and previous to his appointment, Mr. Moore served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, Africa Bureau. Mr. Moore also served as Director of the Office of Environment and Science Policy within the agency's Bureau for Economic Growth, Agriculture and Trade, EGAT. To me, he's more than just a Mr. Moore. He's a dear friend because I've known him from the days he worked in Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe and Malawi, and I can say he's visited my own village. We also have, to share knowledge and experiences, Dr. Gebre Nelson. Now, Gebre is an old friend of this platform. He's been with us on the 5-year journey, and he continues to look for other opportunities to influence the process. He's currently working as a Senior Research Fellow for IFPRI, but he is here in his capacity as Project Team Leader for the HLPE report on food security and climate change. So gentlemen, this is your time to share wisdom on where else should we be going with all our energy and passion for agriculture in climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's give her a round of applause. And I actually will move up to the podium because there are a couple slides I want to use. But let me thank you for inviting me as the Vice Chair of the UN Committee on World Food Security. I will refer to that as CFS because that's our popular acronym. And for us, climate change is increasingly perceived as one of the greatest challenges to food security. And at our meeting this year, which took place between October 15th and October 20th, we discussed the issue of climate change and food security. And in doing that discussion, we were informed by a report of our high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition. And Jerry is going to lead you through the report. But before he does, let me say a few words about what the CFS is and how we work. The CFS is the foremost evidence-based, inclusive, international and intergovernmental platform on food security and nutrition, or food and nutrition security. We aim to strengthen global governance, improve policy coordination and coherence at global, regional, national levels, promote accountability, and share best practices, and facilitate support to country-led processes. Let me talk a little bit more about the best practices and country-led processes. We at CFS think we're lucky because we talk about food security. We don't talk about something as abstract as agriculture. And for food security is measured by 3 things. It's measured by the availability of food, it's measured by people's access to that food, and it's measured by the nutritional value that flows from that food. So for us, when we talk about climate change and we talk about the fact that there are highlands in the world that are warming, from the point of view of availability, that might mean that farmers have to switch from growing potatoes to growing bananas. In areas that are increasingly more humid and are producing grains, when we talk about access, which has a lot to do with small farmer incomes, we may talk about the need for small farmers to partner with the private sector in some very different ways because their areas are more humid, and those grains, if they're not dried properly, are going to degenerate and severely affect the income of those small farmers. When we talk about the mix that takes place as one is raising small ruminants or raising animals, and the fact that it requires more than 1 calorie of grain to produce a calorie of meat or milk, we have to balance that with the fact that eggs, meat, milk, and products from animals are critically important for nutrition, particularly for children under the age of 2 and for pregnant mothers. So by talking about food security, we are not at an abstract level that tends to take people off into what's the trade regime and what are these other regimes. We're very interested in how it affects households on the ground. That's what we do. Now, how do we do it? As I said, we consider ourselves to be the most inclusive forum. And so at our meeting in 2009, we bring together not only member governments, and we brought together 116 member governments at that meeting, but we also have as very active participants civil society and non-governmental organizations. We had 111 of those at the meeting. We bring together the private sector, and we had 46 members of the private sector. And let me give a quick note. We have been working with civil society for about 3 years to increase their numbers at CFS. For the private sector, we've worked with them with their mechanism for 1 year. So the fact that we had 46 members there, we considered very important. We also had a number of UN agencies that include World Health Organization, UNEP, etc. We have research centers, particularly CG resource centers, and we had 3 of the international development banks. They all participate on an equal basis in the discussion that takes place at CFS. Decisions are taken by member states, but discussion is freely open to all, and all contribute in that free discussion. One of the pieces of the reform in 2009 was to create what is called a high-level panel of experts. And I'm not going to walk you through this whole picture, but you will see the high-level panel of experts, which is very much like the SUBSTA or the technical bodies of conventions, provides us with a technical input that actually interacts with the advisory group. The advisory group are all those organizations that I just showed you, except governments. So when a high-level panel of expert report is done, it comes back to the advisory group, and you'll see how they work later on in decision-making. But that is, the high-level panel of expert report is what Jerry is going to walk you through. And then I will come back and tell you what recommendations were made by the meeting based upon that report and the discussion of the report. So, Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Franklin. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, and I see a lot of friends in the room. Let me say just a few words about this report that Franklin has alluded to already. The report came, a request came from the CFS to the HLPE in one of its first meetings after it was reconstituted to do a report on the challenges to food security from climate change. The report request had three different parts to it: a review of existing assessments and initiatives on the effects of climate change on food security and nutrition, with a focus in three areas: the most affected and the most vulnerable regions and populations, the interface between climate change and agricultural productivity, and the challenges and opportunities for adaptation and mitigation policies and action that will improve food security and nutrition. This report is the product of that request. There are copies available out in the front, and I understand we have 6 language versions out here, so choose your favorite language and pick up a copy out in front. The organization of the report is in 5 chapters. The first chapter is about assessing, understanding vulnerability to climate change today. The second chapter is about the future, what might be plausible potential outcomes of climate change in a world where we do the right thing with respect to mitigation or we don't do the right thing with respect to mitigation, but also about economic and social policies as well. Following on that, then we have a chapter that looks at the adaptation options that are available to address food security challenges from climate change in the context of the larger food security challenges that are facing us today. Mitigation is an important topic in the 4th chapter, where the question is, how do we address the fact that climate change is an important contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but also can play the role of reducing emissions from other sectors and while contributing to food security and poverty alleviation. And finally, a summary of the reports and suggestions for coordination and coherence of food policy, food security and climate change policies and actions going forward. Between now and 2050, the world's population will increase from at least 7 billion people to 9 billion people. Most of those will be located in what we call today the developing world. We hope and expect in those countries that income will increase substantially. When that happens, more people with more income means more demand for more food and better food. Those demands will put enormous pressures on the food security challenges going forward. Climate change adds to the challenges coming from the increased numbers of people with higher incomes. When we ask about the vulnerability of people to climate change, there are 3 dimensions that we want to talk about. There is risk, which means exposure, magnitude, and severity, and the ability of people then to adopt, to respond, and adapt. An important point in the report is that vulnerability is not either purely a biophysical concept or purely a socioeconomic concept. It's imperative that you combine assessments of those together to understand the range of vulnerabilities that people are facing, especially poor people are facing around the world. Vulnerability affects individuals. It affects the households in which those individuals reside. It affects the communities in which those households are located. It affects the agricultural systems that the communities are responsible for putting together within the locations and the environment that they live. We must focus. We have an ethical responsibility to focus on the poor. They are vulnerable to many different kinds of risks. They will be especially vulnerable to climate change risk because many of them live in the countryside, are heavily involved in agriculture, and I don't need to tell this room that agriculture is going to be dramatically affected by climate change. And if we want to zoom in even more, and we must, women who play such an important role in agriculture then are going to be especially vulnerable. What about parts of the world? Anyone who has listened to the climate change debate knows that there is considerable uncertainty about where the climate change effects will take place as well as what they are. So if I'll be allowed to wave my hands with a degree of uncertainty, arid and arid regions of the tropics are likely to be particularly affected. So this would be sub-Saharan Africa, South and West Asia, North Africa, and parts of the dry Andes in Latin America. In addition, we can expect to see rises in sea level, both from higher temperatures, but melting of ice off of land masses where it exists today. Countries with agriculture and river deltas will be particularly threatened, and of course, by definition, island states, small island states that are only today slightly above sea level will be particularly threatened. And systems. What kind of agricultural systems will be threatened? Pastoralists, smallholder farmers in dry areas, marine fisheries, but also small farmers everywhere who have limited access to inputs and output markets and off-farm opportunities will be vulnerable. And regions where conflict is ongoing today, whether for political reasons or for access to water or access to land. One of the important findings of the report, which I must say is based on findings of research that is done by people in this room, is that it is essential to integrate biophysical and socioeconomic futures to understand vulnerability. Some highlights from the messages from the report: with high population growth and low income growth, in other words, a world that is not the one we would like to have going forward, the average calorie availability in all regions of the world will decline. In that part of the world where I come from, in the United States, declining calorie availability might not be such a bad thing. But there are many other parts of the world where when the calorie availability goes down, it increases the number of hungry people. It has serious effects for women and for children. Climate change increases the number of malnourished children substantially. Even in the best worlds, it is particularly bad in a world where socioeconomic futures are not what we would like to see. A small positive message is that trade flows can help to adjust. Trade flows can adjust to help to adapt to climate change. But that's if trade policies don't change to restrict flows at the times when we most need them to deal with climate change vulnerability. Adaptation to increase the general resilience of food systems of a variety of kinds. We obviously will need to produce more food, but quantity without ability to deal with increasing variability coming from climate change will not be enough. To do that, we need to understand, as has been reiterated time after time today, the needs of farmers, the rights of farmers. We need to specially focus on the vulnerable groups and communities, addressing, of course, the fact that if we don't do sustainable production, then our children will be the one who pay the price. What can farmers do to adapt to climate change? There are a variety of messages in the study. I won't go into those. What can we do to support food producers to adapt to climate change? I would merely refer you to the discussions that have taken place already today. That's the adaptation part of the story. What about mitigation? Agriculture is part of the problem. Roughly a third of total emissions of greenhouse gas emissions come from the agriculture, 15% or so come directly from agricultural activities, 2% only from indirect energy and other inputs used, but then another 11 to 17% of emissions are indirectly associated with agriculture through deforestation. If we are going to deal with climate change, the threat of climate change, we must do mitigation. But mitigation that does not also sustain food security is a false choice. Fortunately, there are a variety of ways in which we can do mitigation in agriculture and increase agricultural productivity and resilience to climate change, and those are discussed in the report in somewhat more detail than I have time to do today. Just a couple of examples. We need to increase the amount of soil carbon in degraded soils. Good for agricultural productivity, good for resilience. Takes carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to manage fertilizers so that we reduce the amount of fertilizer use that farmers pay for by increasing the efficiency of use, reducing the amount of nitrous oxide emissions. Livestock and manure management can reduce the net emissions per unit of output, and water management can also reduce water use while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Indirect changes in the food consumption patterns can also reduce emissions from greenhouse gases. The report started with 4 policy principles. Let me run through them very quickly. We need to integrate food security and climate change. Data, data, data. We need to involve all stakeholders in the decision-making process. And finally, we need to focus on the needs and the contributions of the disadvantaged. Let me stop there. and let Franklin say what the CFS then did with the report that we presented to them back in July of 2012.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to race through results. At the end, I will put on the screen a reference where you can read all of the results. I think it's important that you read the recommendations because I'm going to give you a summary of recommendations. And that summary of recommendations is a result of the process I've now put on the screen, which is partly technical, partly political. And when you give a summary of something that's partly technical and partly political, you always leave out some important things. So, the committee worked very hard, as I said. We did the report. The report was presented. The Secretariat wrote up a set of recommendations. That set of recommendations then went to the advisory group, which I've showed you. The advisory group is represented by all of the participants in CFS except member governments. They go through the recommendations and then they are presented to a roundtable discussion that had about 45 interventions in the discussion. They are then negotiated by member governments, and here's what came out the other end. In terms of policies and programs, there was a desire to both increase public and private investment as well as to develop national and local capacities, conduct assessments of risks, vulnerabilities, and capabilities, and then for people to participate in developing integrated land use policies, to integrate climate change and disaster risk management, and to look at relevant initiatives such as FAO's Adopt. And you've heard earlier from EFAD that EFAD is also doing a climate change initiative. That gives us much of on-the-ground knowledge that we can further integrate into policy coherence. In terms of things that needed to be recognized, both the diversity of conditions and systems that farmers are involved in, that we really need to be gender sensitive. We in the world, in CFS, recognize clearly that 70 to 80% of food producers are women. So gender sensitivity is important to us. The adaptation of good practices and participatory manners, that countries really need to reflect the multiplicity of stakeholders as they lead assessments, and we would look to the same stakeholders that are involved in the CFS. And to further promote efficiencies along the food chain. The committee then turned to look at research. And in research, which we considered to be critically important, that there would be an increase in international cooperation that includes both public and private investment on research. Research has a very strong and important private component that we would like to see integrated. And we would like that research to cover both adaptation and mitigation, and to particularly focus on small-scale producers. We also came to a conclusion that there's a real need to exchange information between research programs as well as to move that information so that it affects other bodies. I've already mentioned the participation of all stakeholders at all levels. Last thing we looked at was ways in which we see the CFS increasingly linking itself to the Climate Change Convention. So The decision recognizes UNFCCC as the key component forum, support consideration of food security within UNFCCC. That is the small thing I said, so that UNFCCC is not just merely looking abstractly at agriculture, but looking much more concretely about what that means for food security. And we have transmitted the HLPE report and the CFS decisions both to the IPCC and the UNFCCC Secretariat. Now, in terms of a site that one can go to get all of the recommendations, here is the site for all of those recommendations. And I think I'm a couple minutes over, so I'll quit.
Honourable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, that's the Committee on World Food Security. And I think one take-home message I have is that maybe when you talk agriculture, it's too long a word to spell. Let's just talk food and security. Then people will be threatened to do something about it. So thank you very much for the work, the knowledge, the wisdom you've shared with us. And we get the message straight. There are other platforms, but there is convergence because the UNFCCC is an important platform and we need to get our in there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Join me in thanking both of them for sharing. Distinguished participants, we've come to that time of the day where we need to reflect on where we started from. We are here to share knowledge, to share experiences, but to be able to take home a message that says, we were there, we heard, we learned, and we've something to take back to our constituencies, particularly to the constituencies that are here, the negotiators. So I'd like to call upon my colleague. If you think facilitation is easy, it's not ever done by one person. There's been a strong team of women behind me. Robynne Anderson has been sitting at the back, and at the back for many months, not just today, helping us prepare for the day. But today, she's been trying to listen with a keen ear on what are the key messages that can summarize what we've been doing today. Now, she's competent in doing this because she's working with another woman, Egziabher. But more important, they are already working in the business of food. Robynne Anderson is working in the agri-food sector on several processes related to food security, women in farming and development, and she's been an active player in many platforms, and I've known Robynne for many years. She's a farmer. She lives on a farm, a family farm in Manitoba, Canada. Robynne, share with us where we've been and where we should be going.
As always, Linda Way is so extraordinarily kind in her comments. And in fact, the entire organizing team has been extraordinary, and you, the audience, have been extraordinary. The discussion throughout the day has been very lively, both in the rooms and online. So I will be doing my utmost to try and capture in a few moments so many excellent and insightful thoughts. And I think one of the first things we heard at the start of the day was the need to plan ahead. That the issues that are in front of us now regarding agriculture, climate change, food, poverty, landscape management are so critical, and they come together in such a mass that it is so essential that we all look forward, that we must seed the solutions for those problems at this very moment, because they cannot be reversed quickly given the nature of their complexity. And I think we've had extraordinary leadership from the government of Qatar, who have hosted us so brilliantly here, and included the drylands theme that has been a focus for many of the discussions we've had here today. We were told that 1/3 of the world's population actually lives in drylands. And it's for this kind of reason that we've seen the government here take on food security as a central issue, and we really appreciate the support of their National Food Security Commission. And we need holistic solutions. We heard that over and over and over again, that there is nothing that is possible without approaching things in a cross-cutting manner. We need a landscapes approach to natural resource management. We need social, economic, and environmental solutions, truly the full sustainable development package. And it's more than just talking. We really have to look at how we can be stewards and how we can transform livelihoods. It is here to talk about policy, but it's also about action when we get back to the field. And I think Linda Way said it very well this morning when she was summing up the panel. She said, "Take it to the farmer." It's a quote from Borlung, I believe. The reality is at the farm level, and the solutions lie at that farm level as well as in the policy sphere, something that we can sometimes forget when we're in the middle of a UN discussion. And to achieve that, we very much need scalable solutions. I'll highlight just a few that came up. There was a lot of talk about the importance of the land tenure guidelines and the fact that land tenure is central to letting farmers get on with making sustainable decisions and having viable livelihoods. That extension and education are central. That climate smart and or ecosystem agriculture and other solutions are part of a package of looking at agriculture in a more holistic way. And that the use of existing technologies is possible and tech transfer will be central to making us successful at this. The use of existing technologies and tech transfer, which I just mentioned, also lead us to an interesting conversation about post-harvest losses and food waste, which I think have technical solutions, but also are about how we make choices as consumers and in people who are leading lifestyles in developed countries in particular. And one of the roundtables had the most wonderful conversation about how we get to scalable solutions, which is really about partnership. And we often talk about public-public partnerships, we talk about public-private partnerships, but they said there was a key word that was missing: people. We need public, we need private, and we need people engaged in these solutions. The needs are to have inclusive, creative, wonderful ideas, but also action on the ground. And we also heard, of course, about how important investment is. This is an event where we have a lot of people out of the research community, and there were over and over and over again key themes about extreme weather, the need to address water, the need to address emerging diseases, insect pests, and the impacts on pollinators. And most importantly, when we're talking about research, we need to make sure that we're including farmers, particularly women, and other vulnerable groups that need to have more opportunities to have a say in how research is being shaped. And from the roundtables, we got several key priorities for action. Finance, including smart public subsidies, incentives, gathering data at a local level came up several places. The need for risk management solutions, and of course, the need for education. And from the online community, we heard several important things. There was a discussion about how we really do link farming to the UN FCCC discussions. And the tweeting community loves impact figures. The single most tweeted item was that 13 million hectares of forest are lost annually, a fact from the World Bank. And we saw the demand, the thirst for impact figures in the discussion online. And there was also a very lucid discussion about the fact that stressed landscapes really increase the impact of vulnerability and how important these discussions of social and environmental issues are when it comes down to understanding the drivers. We also had a very interesting conversation about mitigation and adaptation, and it happened in several places, both in the panel discussion and in a few of the round tables.
And I thought one of the great things that was said is there are not as many trade-offs as people think. This sort of clashing of mitigation or adaptation is perhaps a false dichotomy, because in fact, achieving adaptation can help mitigation, making good water decisions, increasing soil organic matter. These are solutions that help solve both of those equations. And the frameworks, though, are important. So we've talked about the things we need to do in the sector, but the fact is we're all here to talk about policy solutions. And there's a strong need in the belief for an international protocol and solutions that actually address questions related to agriculture. There is frustration. Will we get to COP 100 with no food, no agriculture, no water included in the discussions? And there's a real concern that there are profound sticking points, like trade, mitigation, adaptation, that are halting this process. So perhaps it's not surprising that we saw discussions not only about what's happening here at the COP, but also with regard to the UN Committee on World Food Security, which Franklin spoke about so well, the land tenure guidelines, and a variety of sustainability initiatives that are currently underway. And I think it's really a challenge for those of us who have been in this room and in this discussion about how to take the comments of the Indian farmer who spoke up and said, I want agriculture in. For this sector, I think there is this need to have a combined consideration of agriculture, forestry, and land use and their impacts in society in the way we talk about things. And that step's already been taken by having the whole discussion over the course of the past 2 days in in this particular venue. But for the countries, there's also the need to talk about accountability domestically and how they conduct themselves in the negotiations so that there's a real opportunity to have meaningful conversation and there is actually some accountability about whether or not we're moving on these issues. And because they're tough issues, I thought one comment that was particularly interesting in one of the round tables was from some people who had some experience in the RED discussions. There is a sense almost that the industry or the sector needs more confidence to know that when we're talking about these tough issues, it's easy to say agriculture's the bad guy, it's the polluter, or we can't talk about that because we're talking about hunger and food security. But in fact, when you really start the conversation and you get into the facts, it actually helps countries move past the rhetoric and really begin to negotiate and get down to the details. And you understand that those trade-offs are not as hard as you always think. So in summation, you've had an extraordinarily rich discussion, and we encourage you to go online in the coming days to agricultureday.org as we post information about some of the outcomes. But we want to say thank you very much for talking so much about food security, because we heard a lot about that today. And agriculture, landscapes, and livelihoods do matter. We had a great range of presenters on the Ideas Marketplace talking about really concrete things that are out there. And I want to give congratulations to the bamboo charcoal team who are handily winning the vote at this point about one of those great concrete ideas that's making a real difference in Africa. And you're welcome to continue voting online until the end of today. We'll do some more features on those successful outcomes. So I'd like to thank you all again. And with that, Linda, would you like to follow up?
Please take a seat. Thank you very much to Robynne and the team for summing up what we've heard, seen, and talked about today. But surely in the audience, there's something we could have left out. Whilst you ponder on your additions and the gaps, I would like to call upon Dr. Peter Holmgren to come up to the front and join Robynne. I call him because he's a special man to this platform. Peter became CFOS DG on September 10, 2012. How many days ago? That's not the reason why I'm calling you up. But prior to that, he led the Climate, Energy, and Tenure Division of the Food Agriculture Organization, FAO, a division of the United Nations, where he developed the profile and coordination of FAO's climate change work and contributions of FAO to the UNFCCC process. He also took the lead in setting up the UN RED program and coordinated FAO's preparations for Rio +20. Yesterday, as part of this Landscapes Mass movement, we spent an exciting time delving into the forest and finding out what it is that we need to do best. And I'm asking you, Peter, can you share highlights of the day and where you would like us to go?
Thank you. I think you spoke almost longer than I had planned to speak.
All right.
But thanks for that opportunity, and thank you for an excellent day. It's been very interesting. Many of the similar issues as we discussed yesterday, and that kind of argues very much for the next step that we have been talking about, which is to next year invite the stakeholders of both the Forest Day and the Agriculture Day to join forces. And we will continue that discussion tomorrow, and I look forward to that very much. We talked about it quite a bit yesterday in the Forest Day. We had already announced that yesterday was the last Forest Day to be held along the UNFCCC COPs, and that in the future we would seek to have Forest Day outside, maybe at a more regional level, maybe with a more focus on national contexts and priorities. But also that we discussed throughout the day that Forest Day has really started out from wanting to help the negotiations forward on the forest issues. And by and large, we can say that that's been done. And we need to look at what the next step is. And at the closing session yesterday, we had a little video showing the process of the Forest Day from the first one in Bali, 2007, and through the other COPs. And I remember one quote that was said, was actually by Christiana Figueres. I think it was last year in Durban, and she said that it's great to have Forest Day because you're always 3 steps ahead of the negotiators. And I think that's exactly where we need to be also with Agriculture Day. That's where you are, and that's where we have been. We are talking and discussing about the things that are not yet on the table, or at least not clarified in the negotiations. And that means that by default we'll be frustrated because they will be behind in our view. But at the same time, we've also enjoyed the negotiators to be at our discussions. And that's been, we heard several say that, including Tony Lavinia yesterday, that we have been a factor. We have provided information that has been useful for the negotiators. So therefore, how can we stay 3 steps ahead? And as you can see already here, we have Forest Day 6, we have Agriculture, Landscape and Livelihoods Day 5. They're already together. The title is the same, Living Landscapes. I think the topics in both days have indicated that there are so many interdependencies between these two, and therefore being 3 steps ahead probably means that next year we will organize a Landscape Day. We will need to define what we mean by a landscape in the next 12 months. We need to be convincing so that everybody understands that we are really dealing with the comprehensive issues of the natural resources management. And I want to illustrate that by 2 things. One is that I think that this is the only way we can move these issues into the negotiations, because otherwise it will always be an environment focus. I think it's fairly easy to understand why agriculture hasn't made it. It's because the convention looks at things from an environment perspective, and as was just said, I think you said it, agriculture is a problem, it's not a solution, according to that view. And therefore we need to, and that's also why the forest issues have been successful, because they can be viewed from an environment perspective. So my first point here is that we need to get these things together. We need to make the case that the convention need to look at this not from an environment perspective, but from a much broader development perspective. The second illustration I want to make is that I had exactly this experience at FAO when I had the job to coordinate the climate change work, and I think we have some people in the audience that were part of that process as well. It's difficult. You bring together people from different communities, different silos, different interests, but only by putting them in the room together and starting to talk about the same things at the same time, you actually find more solutions. I think that's exactly what we would like to do next year. It's already close. Same place, 2 days after. Next day will be even closer, and I think we can take these issues forward and create something that will really influence the negotiations for 2015. I think that's the mindset we should have now. We need to set the platform and the way to influence those negotiations. I don't know if that was what you expected me to say, but okay, thank you.
I got worried when you said I'd spoken longer than you intended to, but I'm glad I stood up and threatened you to say it all. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have from the discussions yesterday and today. Is there anything that's really burning in your heart that you feel it would be unfair to summarize the day as Robynne has done without these two ideas? Online community, we are watching you as well. Feel free to contribute. And remember, it's just one sentence. That's how Robynne had it. It's any gaps, tell us. If there's something that was discussed today that we have not captured, please feel free to contribute. You can send your messages online and these will be captured. Thank you. You've been given the chance. I would like to move on to the next segment, which is the closing high-level keynote address. Robynne, I'll step down with you, but thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we started the day on a very high note. We got the semi-arid and the arid countries to endorse that we are in the right business. We are in the right direction. Agriculture is key, and if there's no agriculture, there's no deal. So we went, yeah. But we heard from the negotiators that we are not winning. The scientists made a call, the farmers made a call, the marketplace ideas showcased some scalable ideas, plus the round tables. But still, we need the votes. This time, we are not voting for ideas. We are voting for a deal that has agriculture within the UNFCCC process. We searched high and low on how we can short-circuit the process, and we realized that there is one continent that is privileged to hold 54 votes, and that continent is Africa. There is a continent that has prioritized agriculture. The heads of state have gone ahead to endorse the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Plan, CAADP, where they've committed that this is a priority sector. It has got to grow at least 6% per annum, and they will put 10% of their annual budgets in there. So really, we are in the right business. So we looked at Africa and said, all right, we've got the arid and semi-arid vote in this room this morning. Can we get the 54 other votes in this room? And we are honored today to have a representative from the Kingdom of Swaziland at the highest level of representation to provide us with the closing high-level keynote. Why Swaziland, 1 out of 54? For those that may not know, Swaziland is holding the chair for the African negotiators. So it is fitting, therefore, that they give us the parting shot. If I was at home, I would have made sure that the praise singers are here, because we are receiving His Royal Highness, Prince Hlangusempi. He's an honorable minister, but in his own right, He's the son of King Sobhuza II, who is the father of King Mswati III. His Royal Highness Hlangusemphi is the brother to King Mswati III. His Royal Highness Prince Hlangusemphi holds a Bachelor of Science degree majoring in agricultural economics. He has great passion for farming, which he practices in his own home. And I have witnessed this because my own organization honored the Queen Mother of Swaziland for being the best in Africa when it comes to farming under smallholder conditions and helping women to meet the challenges of food security at household level. His Royal Highness Prince Hlangusemphi has been working as Undersecretary in the Ministry of Defense for 10 years. And whilst at Defense, he has been involved in the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Currently, His Royal Highness is the Minister of Economic Planning and Development. The Ministry of Economic Planning and Development of the Kingdom of Swaziland is the one that is in charge of assisting the government in the formulation, coordination, and implementation of economic policies and measures that will effectively and efficiently accomplish the country's major economic and development objectives. So it's not just about agriculture, it's about people and lifting them out of poverty. In addition, his ministry is responsible for the Poverty Reduction Strategy and Action Plan, which is currently being implemented through the different government ministries and departments. Further to this, the ministry takes leadership of the population program and demographics. We couldn't have asked for more. This morning, we talked about a holistic, integrated approach where Kenya is trying to put all the ministries responsible for food security under one ministry. Here we have, in His Royal Highness, a kingdom that is being led by a planner who understands defense issues, who understands economics, and who understands farming. Your Royal Highness, this is your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me. And of course, as discussions today have shown, there is much that is underway across a wide range of issues to ensure food and livelihood security is the face of climate change. The knowledge and understanding we now have on the impact of climate change is much greater than it was 10 years ago. This is helping to inform decisions and actions. The fact that we are now in this venue focusing discussion on our priorities and priority areas for actions, as we have all done during the roundtable sessions this morning, is testament to the progress that has taken place and has to take place. At a fundamental level, one of the most significant changes in the past few years has been the increasing recognition of the role of agriculture in climate change adaptation and mitigation. The community around all five has played an important role in making this recognition happen. Yet the pace of change is too slow. There are significant areas in which we do not know or understand enough, where actions are not taken and where support for adaptation and mitigation programs is insufficient. The need to address immediate, short-term and urgent concerns makes it difficult for many governments to also look at the long-term investment and activities that need to be undertaken. But with agriculture being the mainstay of most African countries, including my country, Swaziland, where 70% of the population is dependent on it, both short-term and long-term investments are needed. It is the livelihoods of smallholders, of the poorer farmers, that are most immediately affected by climate change. And yet, we often not been the focus of most efforts in research, extension, and other investments. Farmers like Sibongosi Sihlongonyane, a Swazi farmer, are almost giving up on farming, having faced a string of devastating droughts that have hit the east and southern parts of the country since the 90s. Swaziland is implementing some mitigation measures through the practice of conservation agriculture, agroforestry, and construction of earth dams to provide water for irrigation and livestock rearing with support and in collaboration with non-governmental organizations and other development partners. But we do not have a choice. We cannot afford to ignore this task. As all of you know and understand, this is not just about agriculture. It is fundamentally about our future as people, as countries. We must find a way to achieve a low-carbon path to food and livelihood security. We are already into the second week of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meeting, and eyes are turning to 2013, and so should we looking to what needs to be achieved in the year to come to set us on a successful path to tackle the challenge of climate change. Although priorities may vary, we need to build on synergies between adaptation and mitigation to achieve optimal outcomes. And the systems we put in place need to support these synergies. To allow the discussions in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to move forward, we need to see a work program on agriculture adopted at this session of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. A work program will set us on a path to look at concrete issue and start to look at possible solutions. And it is necessary to enable us to discuss how agriculture fits into other ongoing discussions and to make progress on some key priority areas. The issue of finance has been at the forefront of climate change negotiations since Bali. It is an essential cornerstone for any future progress, as it will not be possible to support projects and make the investment necessary without accessing to financing. With the establishment of the Green Fund, we have made progress, but we now need to understand how these and other sources of funding can work for food security and poverty eradication. We need to build a climate finance to support resilient agriculture in developing countries. Climate finance can play a crucial role in stimulating adaptation for smallholders. It should also enable actions by local, regional, and national organizations to support farmer innovation, knowledge sharing, and awareness of options, as well as support for inputs. The priority challenge is to design measuring tools and systems that acknowledge the primary purpose of agriculture, food security, and which help support decisions making for food and livelihood security and not undermine them. We also need to do more to spur research knowledge sharing. Knowledge underpins our ability to design efficient mechanisms, programs, and methods. There are significant gaps in knowledge which hamper our ability to inform local decisions, develop solutions, and understand cost and trade-offs. Investment, research, and knowledge sharing need to build on the input from affected communities. Finally, we need to look at the tools for risk management, financial tools, but also better information tools which underpin long-term adaptation success. The message I want to give to you today is a simple one. We need to move to a concrete, pragmatic, and solutions-oriented approach. We need an agriculture work program in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we need more synergies with the work going on outside the United Framework Convention on Climate Change. We should not lose our sense of urgency, and we should seek action now. Thank you very much.
Royal Highness Prince Hlangusempi, we thank you for the words of wisdom. We thank you for the endorsement. We thank you for the encouragement that we should go on. And rest assured that it couldn't have come from anywhere else. You are here representing the Kingdom of Swaziland, but more important, representing 53 other countries to make 54 in Africa. We are grateful that you could take time to come and grace our occasion, and thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to that time of the day where we need to part, but we are not allowing you to go without telling us how we have performed. In your kit, you received an evaluation form which we normally take home happily and say, I forgot to do this. So as I share with you what the online community has contributed in terms of the gaps in the summary that Robynne gave, please take time to help us. We strive to improve and to please you as part of the organizing committee, and would like to get your feedback on how this day has been, what it has meant to you, what we should do better, and what you expect in the coming years. So please feel free to feel from the bottom of your heart, honestly, what you believe should be happening. Our online community is active. They've come up with 2 gaps in our summary. We've not said enough about women in stressful conditions. Women are suffering. Can we get a bold statement so that our policymakers can understand that these are the people who feed the family, who feed the nation, who feed the world? Particularly where I come from, 80% of the food that we consume passes through the hands of a woman in one form or another, be it in production, processing, or utilization. So the online community is saying, please put that in bold. The second one is an interesting one. The youth are complaining. Are you aware that they are the farmers for tomorrow? Are you aware that they want to be engaged and involved now, not tomorrow? But most important, they form the majority of residents, particularly in Africa and other developing countries, in the rural areas. Can we make sure we invest in developing the rural areas so that we arrest the rural-urban migration? Because there's currently no jobs in urban areas, but they are still migrating, hoping to find the jobs. They are willing to stay, provided the rural areas are developed too. So please, let's highlight the issue of investments in rural development, but most important, engagement of youth in agriculture, because they want to be involved not just in farming, but in the whole value chain. I hope I've captured those sentiments from the online community. I also ask from you if there are any contributions as you think of any gaps. Please send them online. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised that we would keep time and that I would make sure that we leave sufficient time to enjoy other things. We are honored today to have had many hands that have contributed to making this day a success. We started, as I said today, by being graced at the highest level by His Excellency, Fahad bin Mohammed Al Attiyah, the Executive Chairman of the Qatar National Food Security Program. We thank you, sir. We thank your Deputy Chair. We thank your entire organization for all the support we have received. We also thank particularly the government of Qatar. We have received tremendous support and we are grateful. I want to thank you, the audience. It's been a long day and you've been a good audience, engaging. It's been so difficult to pull you out of your side networking quarters, and that's what this day is about. Meeting, sharing experiences, sharing knowledge, and making sure we can take it back to our constituencies. Thank you. Thank you too to the online community that has been active. When we started this morning, we had 6,500 people following us on Twitter. We've lost count now. They're live, active, and contributing, and we'll be able to capture all those ideas when you go online after this. The panelists, it has not been easy. You've prepared for this day, and that's what has made it successful. The roundtables, the marketplace, we've thoroughly enjoyed what you've shared with us. There have been students in orange t-shirts who've made sure that we don't get lost wherever we want to be, who've made sure that in our side meetings, everything is working. They're already waving at me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. They have volunteered their time, and that is significant. But as we've heard from the online community, they want space as youth in the forefront. Let's not wait for tomorrow. They want to start side by side with us now. We've heard you. There's also been the interpreters who've been working tirelessly to make sure that we can translate to Arabic and to French. And we thank you. Behind the scenes, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you very much. The AV company, we thank you. It's been perfect. Timekeeping, sound management, logistics. Thank you so much for all the support you've provided to us. There's also the hotel staff. We're talking food security, and I'm sure we are all secure here. We've had 3 good meals, and we look forward to more. So thank you so much to the hotel for hosting us and making sure that we are well fed and food secure. Thank you very much. The organizing committee for all 5 days. It's a big group of partners. You've seen the list in the publications. It's been a long walk, but it's a fun one every year, and it comes in all forms. I've worked with a lot of friends and colleagues. We fight a lot, but we make it happen at the end. Thank you so much for putting on your time, volunteering your time to make this day a success. And really, without the Secretariat that has contributed to all this, we couldn't have been here in one place with such a successful day. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you who've contributed to this day. I'm sure you would like to know what next after here. We welcome your ideas on what you'd like to see. But clearly, it's still a long walk to freedom. And the freedom is food security. We are not able to feed ourselves. We are not able to feed the world. And the greatest threat we are facing is climate change. So the two are inseparable. If there is no agriculture, there is no deal. So let's continue the struggle, and I'm sure we are going to win.